Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to put this on gallery view. I want to ask if you can hear me. I put my sound up a little bit high, so I'm not deafening you all. And I want to begin today just to welcome you and say I'm glad to see all of you that I can see in this Zoom format. Let's see, I'll begin by talking a little bit about why I started practicing Zazen 28 years ago, and sort of what I was hoping to get from it, and a little bit about whether I got it. When I started sitting, my life was really busy. I was married and I had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I was running a dance company and I had a dance studio and I was teaching and doing other kinds of production work. And, it was kind of a 3-ring circus. And at the same time, my father was ill and he lived in Berkeley. Both my parents lived in Berkeley. and very soon before I started practicing, he died. And I was with him, throughout his illness, which wasn't a terribly long illness. But I was really with him when he died. I was sitting right with him when he died. And, as I think happens for people, when your parent dies, it kind of makes you aware of your own mortality. He was in his early 70s, and it wasn't impossible for me to imagine being that age. And, it was kind of like I was the next step on the diving board, and it was kind of a wake up for me. And so that was the point at which I started my sitting practice. And I actually took a little time off from my dance company and, sort of made time for that. And around that time, I was talking to a friend who knew me very, very well. And she was somebody who I was dancing with at the time. And she asked me, why was I adding something to my life? It was already just, so complicated. And I was just like running around all the time, trying to just keep things organized and, everybody's safe and fed. And, my dance company, funded and, just like, kind of crazy. And what I remember saying to her was, I, become aware that I'm going to die at some point, sooner or later. And I feel like I'm not experiencing my life. I feel like, it's just passing me by. And I'm always running ahead of it, trying to, make it work or, organize things or do logistics or manage or maneuver or, just always ahead of myself or maybe, behind myself, regretting something that I did wrong or that didn't work out or, a performance that didn't go well or something, or I forgot to pick my kid up at preschool, but, just this general feeling that I wasn't ever, having my life. I didn't have it and I was going to be over. So that's sort of what started me on this path. And I, have been reflecting a little bit on whether, what my kind of hope was for this practice or my dream, has kind of worked out, or how has it worked out for me? And, I just felt this separation kind of between, where I was in my mind and, where I was in my body. And, part of what interests me when I think back on that is, kind of how I knew what I wanted, and kind of what experiences I'd had, that kind of made me know something about it. And, I will say that, dancing was a practice like that. It was a time, often when I was performing, but also, when I was just dancing and when I had been dancing as a child, where I felt, really present and sort of like there was nothing, pulling me out of my body really. And so, that was something I knew about. It didn't sort of translate into the rest of my life. But, I knew something about it from that. And then, I did, in my dance training, some sort of body awareness or movement awareness work or classes that, included, the idea of mindfulness and sort of body awareness. And so, that also was kind of informing me. But again, it didn't sort of leave the studio with me. And I couldn't find it in the rest of my life. And, there were other times too, that I remember sort of sometimes in nature or, when I saw some wonderful music or art, I would have that, feeling of, kind of being right there and maybe sort of dumbstruck. And, the kind of forward thinking would be kind of knocked out of me. I sort of follow trends in psychology because my daughter has been studying it for a number of years. And there's kind of always something new. It's sort of a new idea in psychology. But maybe 5 years ago or something, I started noticing some research that was being done, a lot of it in Berkeley, actually. And it was called The Psychology of Awe, as in awesome or, awestruck. And, the idea of the psychology was that, if you saw or were sort of confronted with something that was, just greater than yourself, like if you saw the ocean for the first time or you saw the Grand Canyon for the first time, it would sort of shift your paradigm and sort of your sense of yourself, and with a very positive effect. And I think part of the research is they're using psychedelic drugs to kind of enhance this experience. But they really talked about these experiences that you have occasionally in nature or in art or something where you're just sort of taken over, so to speak. And so this is a little quote from, what they say about what happens when you have this experience. They say, this is your experience of awe. It can be self-transcendent. It violates our normal understanding of the world and gives us a diminished sense of the small self. People feel like they have more time, increased feelings of connectedness. It makes people more kind and generous. So, I think I'd had that experience. And when I saw the redwoods for the first time, or, when I saw even something small in nature that was sort of breathtaking. So I knew about it from that. And then, and I'm sure there's other ways, that we kind of have an inkling about this. And I read another story, this was in the newspaper, about a guy who was just like spinning in his mind about, the kind of political situation. It was a year ago in June, I guess. And he lived in Chicago, and he was worried about politics, and he was like really worried about the pandemic. And one morning he rode down to Lake Michigan and got off his bike and stood at the edge and jumped in. And Lake Michigan at that time of year apparently is 50 degrees. And he said, it felt so good. I just wanted to block it out, the pandemic, everything. And, so, that sort of physical shock, that sort of moment when you really are sort of thrust back into your body. I think I know about that too, just stubbing my toe, or I don't know, even having a massage sometimes could do that. By the way, the story was that he had done that every single day since then. So I guess it worked for him. So, I had this notion about what I wanted, this notion of waking up. But I didn't know how to translate it into my everyday life. And, I'd read some books about Zen, and I'd done some sitting a little bit before that. But that's where I went at that point to sort of, try to figure out how to have this in my life, how to have my life include this or this experience, or, not to always be chasing my mind, basically. So looking back, I kind of asked myself, well, did it work? Did I get what I wanted? And, I guess the answer is I did, but I got, of course, it's a little different than I thought. And also I got much more than I wanted. And, at that time, I would have said that I probably didn't want more. I just wanted that. And also that I thought it was kind of a little tweak to my life, that I was just going to kind of make my life better. But, it's turned out to be a much kind of larger part of my life and than I thought it would be at that time, and really has changed my life quite a lot. So I wanted to talk about a koan today that sort of, for me, expresses the sort of the bigger sense of where I've come to, or, what this practice is that was bigger than I had any notion of at the time when I started. And I think probably everybody here knows what koans are. They, but just in case you don't, I'll just say that for me, they're little vignettes or dialogues or conversations or stories or dramas, maybe, that little short ones that kind of express our practice and, or some aspect of our practice. And I'm sure there's modern koans. I'm not familiar with them, but I'm sure they must exist. But most of the koans that I'm aware of and that I talk about and have other people around here talk about are really old. They were collected in China in the 12th and 13th century, but the stories themselves are purported to have occurred and often involve teachers who lived at least 200 years before that. So the stories sort of were said to have occurred before that, and then they were collected in the 12th and 13th century. So that makes them like 9th century or before. And, and as I said, they're stories from China. So a very different time, a very different place, and a very different culture, which can make them a little impenetrable. And they certainly were for me when I started looking at them. started studying them with Sojin probably 6 or 7 years ago, and maybe more even. And he was giving classes sort of sporadically and just studying one koan at each class. And, I really did find them very difficult, and kind of only really stuck with it because Sojin just loved them so much. And of course, I liked being around him, but his enthusiasm for them was sort of palpable. But still, I just mostly felt frustrated, and he would explain them, and I would get some little glimpse of it, which I actually valued about. But mostly for me, they were hard to understand. And then about 3 years ago, I started studying them with some of my friends here at the Berkeley Zen Center, first with Jed and Ron, and then with Andrea and Ron. And I've been doing that kind of every week almost since then, and working my way or our way through the Book of Serenity, which is one of the collections. And, I've kind of relaxed a little bit around them, and, kind of felt more confident that I could, interpret them the way that I interpreted them, and that not somebody else wasn't always right about them. And, they've kind of come alive for me. So I'm going to talk about one that's sort of alive for me and sort of talks about, as I say, what I think of as the bigger picture. And I think I'm fond of this one, or I chose this one because not only is it a little kind of story, but it's a little dance for me. It has a lot of movement in it. So this is from a collection called the Blue Cliff Record, and it's called Elder Joe Stands Motionless. And this takes place, at least in my imagination, in the zendo of a monastery. And I picture it sort of like what we call shosan, where it's kind of a formal setting where the student, and this is kind of an experienced older student, is asking the teacher a Dharma question. And in this case, the teacher is Rinzai, who is, kind of was known to be a very powerful, energetic, and very physical teacher. So again, remember, this was a different culture. So here is the koan. Elder Joe, that's the student, asked Rinzai, "What is the great meaning of the Buddha's teaching?" Rinzai came down off his meditation seat, grabbed the student and held him, then gave him a slap and pushed him away. The student stands motionless. A fellow monk standing nearby, a Dharma brother, said, "Elder Joe, why don't you bow?" Just as Joe bowed, he was suddenly enlightened. Mostly people are sort of enlightened from these in these koans. So I'll just talk about, my interpretation, and I'm sure there's others. And maybe if you have others, you'll tell me at some point, because I actually always like hearing them. So the student is asking Rinzai the question, and the question is, what is the great meaning of the Buddha's teaching? And, I think of this as a good question. This is a question, that you really could ask in Shosan or in Dokusan. What is this about? What is kind of the essence or the kernel or maybe the truth, although maybe not, of Buddha's teaching? What's the most important thing? And what's Buddhism? And what are we doing here? Really, all those questions. Those are good questions. And so then the next part I see as Rinzai's answer. Sometimes I used to think those kinds of questions, and there's many of them in the koans. I used to feel like, the answer the teacher gave, like hitting him with a whisk or sending him off to wash his bowl, was sort of a reprimand for asking that question. But in this case, I feel like, and I think probably in all cases, it's really, he's answering the question. So Rinzai comes down off his meditation seat, and you can sort of imagine, Sojin or Hozan getting up and coming down. And this is harder to imagine, he grabbed the student and held him. And for me, that kind of represents Zazen, really. It represents being still and silent. And, partly I feel that, when I first started sitting, that came as such a radical thing for me, to just stop. And just be with what was going on for me at that time. And, to sort of, I felt like I was doing nothing, sometimes for 4 or 5 days. And, to kind of organize my life, to give myself that time, was just a huge thing for me. And also, I felt that, the teacher and the people around me were holding me. They were really supporting me, because I'm not sure I could have sat still if they weren't there. So it felt, very intimate and sort of supportive to have people around me. And, I've heard other people say that, especially at difficult times in their lives, that they really needed to sit with people. They couldn't really do it by themselves. And, I sort of felt that in the beginning. It was harder for me to be alone. So that's what that part is about for me. And then Rinzai gave him a slap. And for me, that is the waking up part. That's the kind of just kind of being knocked into yourself, like jumping into Lake Michigan. It's, you're right there. There's nothing else. It's emptiness, or, being completely just present, just this. And, that's kind of a moment that can come in our zazen, or is sort of available maybe more in our zazen than in our busy lives. But, wherever we experience it, whether it's, jumping into cold water, or seeing the Grand Canyon, or, the rainbow, we can't hold on to it. It's just over when it's over. And, we want to cling to it. I certainly did, but we can't. Time moves on, we move on. And so the next part, when Rinzai pushes him away, I see as sort of, okay, you had that experience, now you have to move back into your life. And, that was really the part that I didn't realize, or didn't think about, or didn't know about, when I thought about, wanting to, be present. I was like, oh, I'll just be present. I won't, nothing else, So that was kind of funny that I had that idea, but I did. And then, the very last part is, his Dharma brother, again, his Sangha, said to him, why don't you bow? And this is, again, kind of like our Shosan. Okay, you got your answer, now bow. And, he bowed. And, then, my feeling is he really got the answer. He saw the whole thing. And so that's sort of how I see the koan. And it's sort of a fuller picture than I had when I started. And, I guess I want to talk a little bit, again, about what I've kind of what's shifted sort of for me. And it's a lot of it has been about sort of this transition between Zazen and, kind of daily life. So, I just guess I had this idea that I was going to sort of escape from all the planning and managing. I just somehow didn't factor in that I was still going to have to buy groceries and, get my kids to school and so on. And, all that sort of planning. I thought, I just didn't realize that somehow I was going to have to keep doing that. And I think, one of the big things for me is that my relationship to that kind of thinking, or then to my thinking, has really changed. And, one thing is it doesn't pull me around in the same way that it used to. I don't run after it quite the way I did. And, I've learned to sort of live alongside it, maybe, or live with it in a way, with my kind of thinking and planning mind, in a kind of more compatible, I would say, way. And, I think, again, Zazen, which is the holding still part of our practice, which is just a huge part of our practice. It's maybe the main part of our practice in a certain way, is really a good place to look at kind of that relationship. It's a safe space, for one thing. A lot of what I felt like I was doing was trying to keep everybody safe and healthy and well, and, my dance company safe and healthy and well. And so, the Zen Center is, kind of a safe space to, let go of some of our thinking. And especially in Sesshin, we have, our forms, which are really, about kind of mindfulness and being present. And then, we have someone who keeps the time for us. We have someone who cooks for us and serves us our food and tells us what job to do. So we have a little freedom to let go of the thoughts that go into maintaining our lives. And, this chance to sort of sit with them and watch them and let them be there and let them go. And they don't seem so, like our survival is so dependent on them. And, we don't have to respond or react to them so much. And, sort of slowly over time, my relationship has changed. And, I think, our thoughts stop running us. And, we are kind of able to be more present, even when we're writing our grocery list, or, when we're quiet or when we're busy. And, so that was sort of a bigger picture than I had. And I'll just tell a little story about Sojin. When I was Shuso, I had to give a lot of talks, and one of the ones I did, maybe the last one, I had to give during the 5-day session at the end. And, I really wanted to sit that session, but, it didn't leave me any time to plan my talk. And so I would be sitting, in my seat, but I would be thinking about the talk that I was going to give. And I went to see Sojin one morning, and I said, I'm not really sitting zazen. I'm just thinking about my talk. And he said, that's zazen. That was a little reminder that, it's all, we can still be present with whatever's going on. I think the other thing that, I didn't really factor in is that I had sort of a rosy picture of, what waking up was going to be like. I didn't really think about that I was going to have to wake up to be present for things I didn't like fear and hurt and anger. I just didn't factor that in. I sort of thought it would all be, whatever, rainbows and so on. Again, I feel like Zazen is kind of a laboratory for this. We sit with all the difficulties and problems that are coming up in our lives. And, right at the beginning, I was like, I just thought, if my knees hurt like this in real life, in regular life, I would just get up and move. But you don't. You sit with discomfort. You sit with, and not always, but sometimes, and you don't turn away from it. And, it's kind of, as people often talk about, a solid, posture where, it feels a little more possible to let, feelings come up, problems come up, and we get some experience, I think, with being with those things. It can be surprising. It can be painful. But we kind of get some confidence that we can sit with what is coming up for us. And, I feel like that allows us to open more to, what's really so. Yeah, I think that's what I feel about that I've become more willing kind of to, let life be the way that it is for me, and less fearful, really. I remember saying to Joko once, I feel braver. And, it's because I felt like I could withstand or stand or be present for more than I thought I could. And that gradually, I think, expands over time. And, we're able to, sort of be bigger and take in more and sort of have bigger minds. We're not pushing things out all the time. I'm gonna end with a very, very short reference to another koan. And this one is the one that I studied when I was the Shuso and studied with Sojin. And it's really a famous one. And it's, one that again involves a very powerful, strong teacher named Master Baso. And this one is called Sun-Faced Buddha, Moon-Faced Buddha. And it stayed with me, it stayed really close to me since I was Shuso. It's really with me a lot. Much has been said and written about it, and there's many ways of looking at it, I can assure you. But for me, it's just really about, including everything, and a kind of a reminder of that. And as I said, it's very short. Master Baso was kind of at the end of his life, and he was ill. The attendant of the monastery came to visit him and asked, "How are you doing? Are you well or not?" And Baso said, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." And I'm going to finish with a short quote from Suzuki Roshi on this koan. I just kind of want to say that I just think that's such a great little answer. That's just such a good answer. I wish I could say that when somebody asks me how I am. So this is the quote. "Knowing that your life is short to maintain it day after day, moment after moment, is the life of form is form and emptiness is emptiness. When the Buddha comes, you welcome him. When the devil comes, you welcome him. The famous Chinese master Baso said, sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha. That 1 year of the life, that is the form, that is the life of form is form and emptiness is emptiness. There is no problem. 1 year of life is good. 100 years of life is good. If you continue this practice, you will attain this stage. So on that uplifting note, I will stop and, take your comments or your questions if you have them.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you have a question now, please raise your digital hand or feel free to send a chat directly to me, and I will manage that for you. Thank you.
So should I call on Penelope, or are you going to, Heiko? You're muted, Heiko. Penelope, why don't you just go ahead, but unmute yourself.
Lovely to hear you. Thank you, Ellen. When you were speaking at the earlier part of your talk about, and it feels like it went all the way through the talk, the theme of awe, it kept reminding me of Mary Oliver, who in many different settings used this phrase of that her job description for this life was to live in praise and awe. I've always cherished that, especially in moments that feel more challenging to find the places of praise and awe, to still hold that position. So your talk was, for me, a celebration in a way of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Penelope. I just want to say the definition of awe, because I looked it up, or is terror or great reverence. So.
That gets to it, doesn't it? Thank you.
Stephanie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Ellen, I was wondering how your dancing, your expression through dance shifted as you started practicing.
Well, it's interesting.
Or whether it did.
Yeah, well, I think it did, but I realized that this had really been kind of a goal of mine always in my dancing, but it became more, I became more aware of it as I started practicing, that I wanted to share that sense of presence. I wanted to kind of communicate that. And I think I actually always did. Even when I was pretty young, I wanted to express that in some way, but I became more aware of that, as time went on. So I think that was the change, but I'm not sure the real sort of wanting to do that changed. I just think, I just became more aware of it. So, yeah. Thank you.
Now a question from Sue. Give me a moment, please, to find and spotlight her. You can unmute yourself, Sue.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Sue.
Thank you for your talk. I was very grateful to hear that you study with senior students. And I wonder about, since you are a senior student, about people coming to you. How do you, like new students, people who become new members? We want to welcome people into the Sangha, and meeting with senior students is a wonderful way to do that. So if a new or old member comes to you, how do you hold that meeting, that practice discussion?
One thing is obviously from my talk, I'm interested in what brings people to practice. I think also because of my own experience, I feel like anywhere somebody starts is a great place to start. So I just kind of, try to make myself available. And often people have questions, and sometimes they don't really have questions, but I like to kind of encourage them, especially newer people, to articulate, what they're doing here, what brought them. And, people usually like to talk about that, actually. So, but partly, one of the things I feel, and I really felt this when I was Shuso, is talking about what we're doing clarifies it. Again, we're returning to silence, and you can't put it into words, but, it really makes you engage with it in some way. So I'd say that about newer students, and about people who've been around longer. I usually just laugh with them. So thank you.
She's good, isn't she?
Thank you. We now have a question from Jeff. Jeff, unmute yourself, please, and ask your question when you are spotlighted. Thank you.
That was a great talk, Ellen. Thank you so much. So many ways in, and that's what I love about great lectures. I think my attention wandered. Among all of the great things that you shared, I missed how you felt about the student being struck in the story you shared.
Well, I think that's a really good question. I actually want to tell a little story here, because, I find that, I have to kind of, be tolerant in some way of that. I'm not into it. But I will say that I have had experiences with teachers. I have asked questions somewhat similar to that, where I felt like their answers were, metaphorically a little slap. So, and I'll give you an example. And thank you for asking the question, because I like this example. So I went to see Sojin, and this is when I was studying the Heart Sutra, and fairly befuddled by it. And, I was talking to him, and unfortunately, I don't remember what my question was. But I said to him, whatever it was, I'm struggling with this. And, I was kind of worked up, and I finally said, I just don't understand it. And, he stopped and was quiet and looked at me, which, kind of, pushed me back into myself. And then he said, yes, you do. And for me, that felt, just like a little wake up, a little like, be here, be in yourself. And so, whereas, I'm happy that he never slapped me and nobody else did, and I don't condone it. Sometimes I've gotten an answer, and that's not the only one, that felt like, just a wake up like that. So that's what I say.
That's one of the best explanations of striking that I've heard, and I think the analogy is really wonderful. Thank you so much.
We have a question now from Ross. Ross, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Heiko. And thank you, Ellen. Your talk reminded me of Suzuki Roshi's comment, be careful about wanting enlightenment. You might not like it.
Right.
And when you spoke about the difficulties and things that you woke up to, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how you embrace those or accept them in such a way that they have the same kind of light and acceptance and appreciation, if you will, for this so-called lighter or nicer or more rainbowy, as you described, aspects of our days. Thank you.
Well, I'm not really sure I do. I want to be clear that, there are many things in my life that I don't like, that are really things that I, wish I wasn't experiencing, that are very hard for me. And so I don't want to kind of say that I don't have any preferences, that I don't pick and choose. I do. And I think most of us do. But I do feel like, I have a bigger, I guess I would say a bigger mind for it, a more tolerant or generous mind toward, the things I don't like, the things I don't like about myself, my critical thoughts, and the things I don't like about other people and their opinions. And, I just have more sort of, I don't know, tolerance is sort of a word, or sort of,
Forbearance, maybe, or patience?
Patience, but there is some joy in it. There actually is some joy in it. I can't explain that, but, there is some, or maybe humor or something in, just how opinionated and picky I am. I guess I would say that.
That's a great thing to wake up to. That also reminds me of Suzuki Roshi telling Sojin, sometimes just being alive is enough.
Right.
To experience all this. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. We have now a question from Gary. Gary, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Gary.
Great talk. I think what Ross was digging at isn't that the moon phase? That part that's kind of you don't like, but you're able to hold. Anyway, my question is, when you ring the bells, say the big bell, what's that like? That's my question.
Yeah, I got your question. What's it like? You mean, it's like lots of things. It's like, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, but, sometimes it's like I'm right here and I'm feeling the vibration of this bell. And sometimes it's like, oh my God, I didn't hit it right. I should have hit it louder or softer, or somebody's going to tell me to do it differently. So it could be all those different ways.
Yeah, as far as what I was getting at, I kind of feel that, at least from my personal experience of it, it's it really brings you something special. I don't know. It just connects you with everything, the universe in a way, that big bell.
Great. I'll just say something that's coming to my mind, which is this is a little personal, but I feel like that bell is kind of the deeper tones, the deeper tonality, and maybe the darker tonality, one might say. There was a period of time when my husband was going through, a period of what some people might have called depression, but he did not want to call it that. He called it, he was just living in the lower registers. So I just thought that was a good thing. He's on this Zoom, so he may have something to say about that. But, so thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Right now, we have no questions. Let's take just a moment of quiet and see what comes up. Thank you all. Bring your questions. There we have a question from Helen. Please, Helen, unmute yourself and go ahead. I'll start your video also, please, Helen, if you will.
Oh, hi. I didn't intend to raise my hand, but I did have a question about what number the Blue Cliff in what case number that was.
Number 32.
Number 32. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it. Okay, bye.
Kurt, I think you should unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great. Thanks so much, Ellen, for the talk. It was really wonderful and heartfelt. And like someone, I think Jeff mentioned earlier, so many ways of connecting with it and resonating. One thing that occurred to me is when you were talking about those experiences with nature and awe, and actually, I think that is part of the definition of awe is it doesn't fit into our conceptual structure, right? Some experience. And so then we need to accommodate rather than assimilate or something. But you mentioned being dumbstruck, right? And it made me think of a talk Jerry gave earlier, a while back about the fool and, parts of our practice where I think it's the jewel mirror where it says practice like a fool or, and so I was just wondering that notion of being dumb, right? Of not knowing, of practicing in not so logical or rational, I guess, kind of way. What we would say is usually rational. If you would talk a little bit, if that's been part of your practice, that letting go of the analytical mind and allowing yourself to be dumb, and if that's helpful or how you can do that, or maybe not.
I think you're sort of talking about it, so maybe you have something to say about it. Has it been part of your practice?
Yes. Yeah. That's why it kind of resonated to me that being, because so often, and still, you want to figure out, right? You want to know, or you want to, but all of that, I guess for me, the knowing, the figuring out is, it's a kind of wanting to control, maybe wanting to be safe. And so just letting go of that and just not knowing and having some trust with that. And that's been an issue, certainly for me, because that is a little scary to say, well, I don't know, or I'm going to really confront this fully and just open to it and not know and not have a way of understanding it or figuring it out or that kind of thing. So yeah, that is, I think, a edge of my practice is practicing being dumb, and that is really useful. At least for me, sometimes I think it was Santayana or somebody said something, paraphrasing, reason and rationality is a good servant, but a poor master.
Right. Right.
And so
that's really well said. I think we can't do without it, but we give it way too much power, way too much of our kind of confidence. And, it's a hard thing to let go of. And again, I think, Zazen has been sort of the way that I've sort of been able to see that it isn't who I am, really, because I really thought it was. So thank you.
We have now a question from Susan Marvin. Susan, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Susan.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you.
So, can you say something about, for you, what's at the very center or the meeting place or the heart of sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha? And I'm asking this because, now we're coming into the fire season, and you and I have been talking about that, being outside walking and talking about the air and how are we going to practice with sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha?
Well, that's something I actually think about quite a lot, the sort of, all that means is those fires, climate change, animals dying, all of that sort of heartbreak, really. And, I think it is, just both terrifying and heartbreaking. I think it's, there's like things in life that are just difficult, and in a certain way, our practice doesn't change that. There are things that are just, sort of overwhelmingly painful. And, so when I think of sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, I think of that sense, and I think you've had this experience, and I have, of, sitting with something that you can barely bear, and something, kind of expands so that you can hold it. And I guess that's what I think about this. And, and then we have to remember, that today is beautiful, and our gardens are really nice, and the trees are still there for now, and that part of it. But there is some way of just expanding to hold that kind of trauma and pain that I think, we've all experienced and we will experience.
So maybe heartbreak is at the meeting place or the center of sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, and that might not be a bad thing.
It's not.
What do you think?
I don't think it's a bad thing. And I don't
Me either.
But I used to think it was a bad thing. At one time, I thought heartbreak was really a bad thing.
Thanks, Ellen.